So welcome. So maybe we can start with a short introduction. I will let you introduce yourself. I think you know yourself better than I know you. So.
Hey, thank you, Anke, for the invitation. So, my name is Gwen. I'm working as developer relation for Aura, which is an Oracle company. But I'm also professor in France in blockchain technology. So, yeah, I'm very happy to be able to discuss with you about Pluralist framework.
Awesome, yeah, welcome. Thank you so much for staying here this long. I mean, they've been really interesting talks. So my name is Anke Liu. I am the Ecosystem Growth Lead at the Stellar Development Foundation. So the foundation leads the development of the open source Stellar network, which is like an open source blockchain layer one network that really focuses on everyday financial services. At the foundation, I lead our ecosystem growth team, which really focuses on the zero to hero for like projects building on Stellar, starting with our hackathons, build residencies, etc. Our main bread and butter is our Stellar Community Fund, and I'm going to call out Gemma Dawes, who runs actually the day-to-day operations, and we actually have some winners or award recipients in the audience as well. We have Enzo from Smart Deploy. Block Science has also gotten a grant. We have Zook was here the other day, and Danny from Blockful. They left. Great. Well, anyway, it's just really exciting to kind of meet up with so many people that have been participating in the fund. And yeah, excited to speak more about Pluralist grants.
My name is Disruption Joe on Twitter. In person, you can just say Joe if you say hi. I've been in crypto since 2017 full-time. Gitcoin, I started in 2020, leading some grants rounds from around 8 to 10. And then I led our civil defense as the first person to leave to the DAO from the company from rounds 11 to 16-ish. And then I started a company, Plurality Labs, where we saw the opportunity at Arbitrum, where they really decentralized how the DAO was functioning, giving all sequencer fees to the DAO, and started a first Pluralist grants program there. And from there merged with Thrive Protocol to really move the trust from our consulting layer. And Thrive had a scalable, dApp, but we really need to make a protocol that holds that trust in the long term. So that's why we merged and what we're doing together. You can see all our stuff at Thank Arbitrum, thankarb.com.
Thank you for the introduction. So let's start with some basics. So what is Pluralist framework? Who wants to take that one?
I think you're the best one. Sure. Yeah.
Being at Gitcoin, I saw this unique opportunity to iterate round over round and improve the way that the grants were funded. And I also saw a unique opportunity in the way we had multiple rounds came out. After around I think it was round 3, we got a few other funders outside of, Ethereum Foundation Consensus, and by round 7, when Chainlink was the first one to jump in as a sponsor, all of a sudden all the other DeFi protocols came in. And that was around when we were all farming like vegetables. That was a fun summer. And every one of them wanted that legitimacy of being involved with Gitcoin. And what was interesting was we realized like some of them wanted to put money into the pot for Ethereum in general. Some of them wanted the mechanism we were using for their community and their own ecosystem fund. And as we saw many different programs start up, what we realized in interviews and talking to, the users and, people like the Uniswap Foundation, they would say like, quadratic funding is great for sourcing new ideas from the edges. We love how it creates like this marketing buzz because everybody's showing their project. What we don't like is that it's not great for deciding who to double down on because it like checks into their milestones and sees whether or not they complete them. And what we realize is that each function of funding, whether it's liquidity incentives versus operational needs versus funding your open source dependencies versus hiring service providers, funding what matters is a lot of different types of funding are required to fund everything that matters. So by having like one grants program, you're not nearly as efficient as you should be. And 2, that means there's one group or entity that has all the power to hand away the governance or responsibility. We know from the real world that the money and power goes to the people closest to those who give out the money. So by separating out and have many allocators, it brings up some new problems that we have to solve. But I think it actually solves more than it creates.
Okay, do you want to add something to it? To the definition of basically?
Yeah, maybe on why, I guess. Yeah. I mean, so at Stellar, it's really interesting. So I'm not sure, if many of you are familiar with Stellar, but actually we added smart contracts functionality earlier this year, which is really exciting. So which means that our ecosystem is currently going through a rapid growth right now. And so what this means is that, and why I'm interested in pluralist grants programs, is that when it comes to grants and ecosystem building, one size doesn't fit all. Right, and especially we saw last year, where it was okay, we actually need to build everything, so we're just going to have a lot of prospective grants, and they're going to be similar sizes, and it's going to be similar funding mechanism, and that worked really well, right, up to a point where we're actually launching, and we're now there's now needs for marketing, there's actually needs for larger projects who are already on other chains to come in, and there's a different way of funding, there's a different way of measuring impact for those. So yeah, I would underscore the need for one size doesn't fit all, and this is especially in growing ecosystems or ecosystems that are going through rapid growth, like Arbitrum as well, where you really see the need for a pluralist approach. I mean, in terms of I would say it's from an ecosystem building perspective, it's you have so many different types of projects who are going to different stages. I would also say the decentralization perspective that you brought up of need, and especially in the Web3 world, of needing to trust one way of funding, and you need diverse perspectives in order to actually holistically grow an ecosystem. I would also say for us, we have found that if we have tried out earlier this year with giving a lot of hackathons, giving grants to hackathons and just letting them run the entire thing, actually gets a lot more developers in, especially locally where we can reach. So maybe, SDF's based in the US, we are not everywhere all the time. We have a small team. You can be, right? But now we have such large adoption in India with the rising community, and there's lots of others out there that are just really empowered to set up their own things. And so so reaching more developers and also filling needs that the fund is currently not supporting. I guess I'll give it. I'll have a lot more other thoughts, but I'll give it to
Yeah. Actually, it's really interesting what you're saying about onboarding more developers from local community, because as a project and as a DevRel, you need to run a lot of different programs and a lot of different grants, and so basically there is some way with pluralist grants is you can create local communities and then just give you have some developer advocate, for example, in each countries, and you give them free allocation to finance local project, and I think this is the best way to do it, because if you're doing it only from a US perspective, you will finance, I don't know, maybe because we all know for example, fundraising and project in Europe, it tend to be small compared to the US because it's not the same problem, it's not the same demand. And so you will have some very big difference, how people see the prism of creating a project and financing it. And so this is something really interesting with pluralist grants is we need to have different way to find to fund project.
Yeah, thank you for the perspective. I'm learning as I'm sitting here. So basically what you are saying, it's running pluralist grants programs. It's basically bringing way more or solving more problems at the same time than if you will run just one type of program, if I understand it correctly. And if you are in rapid growth and you need to solve something on the protocol level, then on something on the community level, it's probably very two different problems, and you cannot solve it with one solution. But if we are thinking about actually running those programs, because also running one program, it's probably way easier than running multiple programs. So how you are dealing with that challenge? What's the kind of, I would say, almost a cost of running multiple programs? And maybe then we can also get into where is the sweet spot? We cannot run program per project if we need to be somewhere in between. So I don't know, with like maybe onboarding the developers into the ecosystems, like how you see it from the developer perspective.
Yeah, so thanks for the question. Like it's really like you need to find a way to be generic but not too generic. And so basically how it works is like you're trying to create like a framework, for example, for tooling, because usually you need tooling. You try to create something for community. So you try to split it because you can't obviously like put like one person in charge of like every project and just track the project and finance it. There is really lots of different aspects when you're financing a project and you're creating grant programs. And like basically you can create some Plurality labs kind of thing, like show like what you did for Arbitrum. And so it's like, you have, for example, program manager, like grant manager. And so there is you can just put some developers or some other community member or DAO people in charge. And then they will track, for example, like 10 different tracks. And then you have feedback. You need to have a lot of metrics on what they're doing, different check-in, track if they're building something useful or if they're not building. Sometimes, it happens. And there is also other way. For example, if you're looking at like a ACI for Aave now, for example, it's like you have someone like Mark Zeller, for example, which is like creating like part of the co-founder team. They're just trying to step out of the company and then just running those grants program with a small team. And then you just like trying to outsource your developer as well, like with BGD Labs. So they just split out different parts of the company, and then you can also like run it this way. But yeah, there's few different ways. Yeah, I don't know what you're doing at Stellar for that. Yeah, or you want to add it?
Yeah, just was thinking that this direction will be good. So maybe Joe, you can go next to actually, because like you are running a lot of programs like Rust grants from. So you can talk about the sweet spot and what like you already realized, like maybe this is too much, this is too little. And then Anke, you can kind of react to it because I know you are building this program. So maybe you can say, okay, we were not thinking about this or we are thinking about it like differently.
There's an inherent cost to doing the pluralistic model because the pluralistic model is built to confront complexity. So as opposed to a complicated system where you can predict everything that would happen and take it apart, like reductionists, take it apart, put the block pieces back together again, you can't take apart the weather and put it back together again, right? And economies are much like that. So when you call it ecosystem, it's because there's an economy. That's why the prefix is the same. And so it's inherently a complex topic. My thought is that a pluralist system is actually not an interesting mechanism, but is actually essential to capturing a network effect and ecosystem growth because it is a nonlinear function for ecosystem growth, which at first, when people look at how it's performing, if you look at it against like a linear system, right, like one grant program that can iteratively improve, there's a cost. It feels like it's not doing as well. Owaki yesterday actually put together finally verbally the best explanation for this, which there's a thing called Goodhart's law where once a metric is set as a target, it ceases to be a good metric because it gets gamed. And then if you put that together with the need to be open for people, so you have to show the target, it becomes even harder. And so in a lot of our grants programs, this place where those come together give us no option for the linear growth system because you need to have higher levels of variation in the settings on which you're adjusting to make sure that your system is outplaying the people that would be like the farmers. And we know that's a huge problem. So one, I think it's absolutely necessary. And in practice, that happens with a lot of learning. Like, we're going on a year now in our program. We were trying to do, 6 months learn, but then some programs ended up taking a little longer than they needed. Working out KYC things for different unique programs that, use smart contracts in different ways. And, every little piece there that, 2 years from now we'll have a booklet. We have to learn, and we have to take the cost from our delegates in terms of having to convince them that we actually are intelligent and know what we're doing And just like any startup founder, you know, when you have them investing in a J curve, you know, they're investing in something that, you know, traditional investments would provide returns immediately. However, the pluralistic one with its non-linear return does have that cost built into it. You know, you're running across 8 programs, 10 programs at a time, and you know, you're waiting for one of them to catch, because that evolutionary mechanism, when one of them catches, you know, you can scale that program horizontally across geographies. You can scale that program over time by giving more and more funds to it and seeing how big it can get and still succeed. So, yeah, that's.
Yeah, no, definitely. Like, I agree with that. So I guess, like, I mean, grant farming, you know, you mentioned, I mean, that's just, I mean, I would definitely not recommend to start out with a pluralist grants framework. If you're just starting, and, you know, just start simple, right? And that's because, like, the more, yeah, I mean, complexity is a real thing. I mean, even like in the Stella Community Fund, as some people know, we had a 2-tier structure, and that was already difficult for people to understand. Like, there's an activation, and then there's a community award. You start with one, and then you can, if you finish one, you can do the other. Seems simple enough. Well, guess what? So, yeah, I think like you need a really, really solid structure with a great overview. Make sure it's very clear how these programs like fill these diverse needs, and also being highly metrics driven. So, like having short pilots and like, did it actually work or did it not? I mean, and sometimes it actually does take quite a bit of time for to see those results. And you know, I think from, I mean, you know, I consider myself a professional lurker into some of the Arbitrum optimism ecosystems, and you know, here as well. I mean, you know, like seeing that actually, like, I mean, I do want to recognize here that the DAO or the community also has, you know, considerable knowledge, and there's a really powerful thing going on, right? And so you need to be really considerate when you are starting. I mean, especially in working with the Stellar community, when you are starting to pluralize, that this is actually something that the community also is comfortable with. I mean, for Stellar, I think like we're currently, like where we're seeing the largest needs are getting more people in, but also filling needs that can be much better filled, not by us, but by others. And some of the, I guess like something I want to call out is a really high potential, what I see for these types of things is actually funding contributions to open source projects. Actually, we're working with Only Dust right now. We did a little pilot where actually like open source projects that have been funded by the Stella Community Fund could set themselves up to have a lot of issues, and then the developers that were part of that cohort could actually like solve those issues, and they could get contributed for that. And so what you get is, rather than like, and then you actually like, we grow open source projects collectively and make them stronger, rather than like having a lot of like isolated projects that do kind of the same thing, compete with one another. And that's where I see a lot. I mean, for the rest, I'll go through it quickly, like retroactive dependency funding, like DRIPS is really cool that we're currently working with. Like, you know, actually, well, I'll need to like follow up with them because they need to do it on Stellar. But, you know, going from non-EVM to EVM is hard. I would also say, I mean, donations from others to impactful public goods and quadratic funding is not something we've seen on Stellar just yet. You know, we have Givit, I forgot, but Givit has also just got an SCF award, a Stellar Community Fund award, to start on Stellar. So super excited for that, and seeing if there's actually some cool quadratic matching funding that we could do there. And then also collective RFP processes for dev tooling for like missing items, and trying to really like work together rather than, let's say, one foundation setting it up. So yeah, I would really, to sum it up, focus on like a lot of the missing items, make sure that you don't do an over redundancy, and trust also the DAO and the community that they actually have this collective knowledge built up for, I mean, sometimes years, and they're also really good at making decisions. So yes, that's it.
Thank you for that. So, like we discussed, like the kind of why and what you are thinking about it, and also more like the from program perspective, but from like operational perspective, how you actually want to run it. Like, cause, you know, you said you have a small team, you need basically help from others, and Joe, I know you like it's. You can make it. Don't worry. You're good. But I know Joe, you also like running the programs basically like for Arbitrum and other communities. So what's maybe also like, what's the advantage, and also what's the kind of ecosystem like reaction to it, like that someone else will be giving away their money, you know, like, so what's kind of like how they look at it, like what they think it's like a good thing about it, what they might be hesitant about, and how that kind of works.
I mean, naturally, when people don't fully understand what's being done, especially in the innovative sector, they lean back towards give us milestones and KPIs. And when those milestones and KPIs are just simple steps or progressions without like potential ROI each time, you know, as a nonlinear kind of system does, you have people that understand it and are supportive of it. You have people who understand it and need to see more to put the connect the dots for themselves, right? And so you have to work with people and talk to people a lot more in the community to make it work. Like much more communication is necessary than running just a simple program. And a very simple example of, you know, where this might come into place is like, if you imagine Gitcoin's open source round, they did a 3-round thing with infrastructure and with dEPs or dev tooling, and then one for hackathon winners, where the infrastructure is well funded by the quadratic funding, and the hackathon winners would be better funded by saying what their next future milestones are and having, you know, community reviewed milestones that pay out at certain times and points of, you know, progression for them, rather than quadratic funding. But it was a good start to mixing up. Now, I can say that I'm seeing a lot of heads nodding here, but to actually turn the ship, if the ship was the size of this room, even though I see almost everybody nodding, we may or may not be able to get there, right? When the ship's like, you know, 600,000 token holders, you know, you're like, it's a little harder. And realistically, it's, you know, some number of delegates that you really have to talk to. But, you know, they talk to other people and sense check to make sure they're sane. So even if it is like 8 delegates could, you know, approve it, and everybody's taking that scenario and they're like, it only takes 8 people. It's like most of them, there's at least 2 in the top 8 that don't vote for it. So that means you need to get another like 20 at that level. And each of those people talk to others in the ecosystem and sense check that idea. So, you know, the amount of communication you have to do and to explain that you have these many different programs and why each of them serves a purpose and how it connects to the ecosystem needs. And maybe they agree with 7 of the 10 ecosystem needs that you have, but not the other 3. And they want to stop the project because they don't think those 3 are good. In the Pluralist program, you have to re-coach the delegates to accept failure as part of the process because it is experimental.
A follow-up question on that for you.
I don't need to be here.
Okay, well, I was actually, actually, maybe I'm like digging up, like opening a can of worms, but I've been hearing a lot about the gaming grant proposal. And I was also, I mean, in our ecosystem too, like when we are talking about these things in the community, you know, there's a lot of like concern, and like there's a lot of like, it's a very like a high risk-based mindset, because like these are like, well, even though they're SDS funds, right, these are the SDS funds are meant to be spent to the community and to the ecosystem and to build it holistically and in a fair way, right? And then so there's always a lot of like a mindset of, well, I mean, is this the right way, right? Like, we don't know much about this person. This is a long time. And I also think, like, I mean, what we have noticed, actually, like, trying the thing out and then having results from it and say, like, hey, actually, we tried it out on a small scale, it worked, actually helps a lot. And I think the shorter time frame to start with. But yeah, then I did see that the gaming proposal was 3 years now instead of 2, one snapshot, which was interesting. So yeah, I would love to have your opinion on that, how you want to manage that in the Pluralist grant program.
Part of the Pluralist grant program is that we're searching for good governance layer. So as a grant ecosystem allocator, we fund grant programs. And each of those programs has a specific ecosystem need and a mechanism they're connecting to test if that mechanism is best for that need, right? And when we find one that matches the best, we may scale that. The other ones, after a season, we'll cut most of them There's a few we'll coach to get better if we think they could have, but maybe they need to be managed better. And there's maybe 2 of the 10 that get to go on and scale. So when I think about the gaming proposal, it's kind of in the thing that we don't want to do anything that signals ownership, or like we're trying to own the DAO or be the CEO of the DAO. So we're only like, 2% of the funding that has gone out so far, and less than 1% of the funding that's basically been approved, snapshot and tally. So, it's a very small innovation fund, and it doesn't try to govern any other allocation system. What we do have is decentralized review from our program that can create a similarity and of assessment across all these programs. So, whether it's an individual gets a bunch of authority, so like our Questbook programs are like this, which are outside of the program that we run. They call it delegated domain authority. One person gets elected, they have a domain, and they can turn around grants in 48 hours. They can just decide themselves up to 20 grand, and then with second person up to 50 grand. So that moves fast, right? And that's not governed by us. Only the programs that we've funded are governed by us. So the gaming proposal is a $250 million proposal that's been, it's been debated and discussed for almost probably coming on a year now since its first thoughts, but really heavily in the last 6 months. And we had to get together in person at the GovHack in East Denver to really move it forward substantially at all. And now finally, around now, just a couple weeks ago, it was going through the tally. But the conversations that were had were saying, well, Treasure DAO is our biggest delegate. They're a gaming studio, right? Zai is in our top like 10 or so between them and their founder. And, they're a critical part of the ecosystem. And Arbitrum leads in DeFi for sure. There's more bridge ETH on Arbitrum than all the other L2s combined. But what's the next vertical that it has a great chance to win? And it was already getting a lot of gaming ones who had gotten a ton of funds that were kind of leading in gaming without giving out grants. And so they said, actually investing would be smarter. But are we the ones who are smart enough to invest directly into games? No, we don't know what that's about, but there is an industry of studios who are good at that. Now, what's the time frame and the amount of funds that are required to make a bet in that? Because if you make too small of a bet in that game, you're guaranteed to lose. That's why it is the level that it is, because it's going to be making investments into gaming studios, which then have their own aligned incentives. And it's also going to be a small amount of operational work to provide, imagine if, it was like a university where like the game builders could come. It's not looking at giving grants to individual students, but it really wants to make all of the facilities great. Lunch is great. They have like great after school programs, and, the buildings are state of the art. They're going to build up the ecosystem around there, and all the things are available for you if you build on Arbitrum, such that you don't want to build anywhere else. So,
Great answer.
I can add something just on that. Yeah, like when you want to find like new verticals, sometimes there is also come like the research question. And for the research question, because as foundation, as a DAO, you need to also to finance research for like the long-term perspective. And this is super hard to get accepted by delegates, because they're like, when you're paying like a researcher to create a paper, like sometimes it's just like a scholar paper, and then it gets down for like 5 years or 10 years and no one uses it. And then there is a student, like one day he reads this paper and he's like, oh, this is a super idea. And like, then he's reading a paper and he's getting like thousands of citations, and then it really helps the protocol and the ecosystem. And this is really something which is kind of hard, like when it comes to like grants and like financing in a decentralized way, is like sometimes the ROI is not like in a month, because we're financing a lot of dApps, we're financing a lot of tools, we're financing game studio and everything. But like for the research side, And especially like, yeah, when you're working as professor, you really need those finance sometimes to work on really like new primitive like Ethereum foundations. They're financing a lot of things like that. But even for them, like having like what's the ROI, and there is the ROI like when you want the proposal to get accepted, but then after when the paper is done, it's still you still don't know like what is exactly the ROI. You're like, yeah, that's a great paper, but like, will someone use it? Will we implement the technology on that? So yeah, so this is, yeah, there is also like different parts, and this one, yeah, I think it's the same, yeah.
You know, some of what I heard in there also is like about the consistency of being able to use things like the next season. So with like the Pluralist grants model, you know, you're part of your carrot that you're hanging out for each of the grant programs is to be able to go next season, and even for some of the grants to become, like if they're research, they may become a work stream. An example would be we gave what we call a fire starter grant. It was $50,000 for somebody to go research what we should do to start doing treasury management. They came up with the top 3 subjects they should look at. You know, one was, you know, just straight treasury diversification, and then how would they approach that? And they had a few different ideas, and one was on sequencer fees, one was on RWAs. So they went down the RWA path, and at the end, it ended with a proposal which is up now for $35 billion to be invested from the DAO into RWAs, which BlackRock and Franklin Templeton were applying to Arbitrum DAO to participate in our DAO, right? And this is something that, you know, a lot of DAOs wouldn't have gotten to this level or reached it, because it took like 3 levels of autonomy and, you know, a bit of a shield from the delegates for the funded people to be able to autonomously go down their path, right, and find what was best. Like people would say, well, that person who was selected, they're not a financial person. No, but they're a communicator, they're a journalist, and they're an investigator who does research in their past. So they're going to find good stuff and communicate it, and they're not going to be biased towards one company or another, right? And they brought in some experts, found the ones they liked, made a great committee, got it through. And, you know, those kind of things can happen when you give out the autonomy.
And follow-up.
I have such an easy job as a moderator here. Just talking to each other is nice. And because I don't know any other question, any question from audience?
Yep.
Nothing? Eugene?
I know you all touched on this, but it'd be interesting to hear as you're considering sort of the pros and cons of pluralism, and specifically thinking about how much, say, coordination needs to exist between all of the plural efforts. How do you think about like how to think through the overhead component of that specifically?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I think like the major con, if we're starting with that, is like you can have some overlap because the coordination process is it's a huge thing, like, you know, because it's like all governance forum, and we just like discussing. We have like one answer at a time, and it's like long blog post, and we're spending hours discussing blog posts usually. And so when you're funding like various grant programs, sometimes you can think like there is some overlap, but in reality, if you like financing, if you're funding different people and they're doing the same project, but it not be exact the same way, it's still a pros, because you will have different solution, and then you will keep the best one. So yeah, just my take on this one.
Yeah, I mean, I would also say that, I mean, don't decentralize for the sake of decentralization, right? Like build things that actually have needs, like that actually support the ecosystem growth and actually like fill a missing piece in the funnel. Like, I guess like maybe like with pluralist grant programs, like I think, I mean, the danger, I mean, aside from complexity, grant farming, I mean, let's not get started on that. But it's more like the redundancy too. And it's like, I want to make sure, like also like in the Stellar ecosystem, I've been doing a lot of thinking about this, and it's like where we see a lot of opportunities, especially on the on the top of funnel side, right? Where it's just like actually there's a lot of localized communities all over the world. They're building a lot of cool stuff. They can do a lot of contributions to the chain. I believe that when it comes to more of the more down the funnel, you really see that there just needs to be really solid mechanisms. There don't need to be that many, as long as they're just really good ones that like fund the development of the chains, and that also are a little bit, and those tend to be a higher dollar number as well, right? And then I guess like when you kind of have that, like I see it kind of a little bit like this, where it's like top of funnel, like kind of getting started. They're going to this, like, I would say, like, core engine, which I would also believe it will be the Stellar Community Fund in our ecosystem. And then actually from there, they kind of, like, spread out, because, like, the way someone can actually, like, evolve an ecosystem, like, differs. If they're, like, and there's, like, so many types of accelerator programs, so many types of, like, impact, even governance programs that can help them from there, because, like, they do need to graduate from the grant programs eventually. Like, you cannot, I mean, aside from, I guess, like, if you have cool, like, public goods, but like for a Stellar ecosystem, we have tons of like for-profit companies as well. So like having that and facilitating that graduation progress is really important. So yeah, I would say don't over decentralize, because especially if you have a small team, it's going to be hard to manage. But yeah, that's what I'm saying.
I'd say pretty much every ecosystem outside of like Ethereum, Bitcoin, and maybe like Lido or like a couple others haven't gained the network effect in their ecosystem. And the governance of Bitcoin Ethereum is discounted a lot when we talk about DAOs. However, it's very pluralistic. And I don't know everything, but I'm pretty sure that if you keep using like a linear model without the pluralistic model, there's no way you're going to outcompete in the long run. It doesn't mean that every pluralist program is conducting itself well or great. But what I do know is that the pluralist programs will outcompete, because it's a pattern we've seen many times over and over in different industries. And it is a complex world that we're facing. We are going to be doing a workshop on that at 3. I'm going to be doing with Kat from Thrive Protocol. Specifically, I'm looking at the roles of, there's a new role in this introduced, which is the grant ecosystem allocator, which allocates to many programs, and then also is responsible for someone who's responsible for conducting all of the fair assessment across all of these. And when I think about the communication thing, it's specifically difficult to get the delegates to understand that what we're looking at as an ecosystem allocator has to be, is this program scalable? Is it the right people who are running it, who we think can be coached and make it better? Because if you look at just the grants that were funded, the Treasury grant that I mentioned that turned into the RWA thing, there were 2 of our top delegates who were like, this is a horrible idea. Even through the second round of funding, we're like, this is super. Now they're out there, and when they're on stage, they're talking about that as a success, right? Now you can't have them judging the individual grants that the program funded when you're the ecosystem allocator, right? So it does have a lot more communication, but that communication is kind of happening programs to ecosystem allocator, projects to the programs, ecosystem allocator out to the delegates out. So it creates this kind of inverse funnel structure that makes it not so much more complicated. It's actually just a different conversation that has to be had at each layer.
I think we just ran out of time, but I like your closing comments. So I think we good here. So thank you very much for participating in the panel. If anyone has any other questions, I think you will be here for a couple more hours. And there is a workshop at 3 on pluralistic grants. So you should definitely attend. It will be in the rooms in the back. So thank you again.